Wonder how a breakthrough idea actually becomes reality? Hi, I'm Susan Lindner, and this is the Innovation Storytellers Show, where I sit down with the change makers behind the world's most inspiring innovations to learn how they did it and the stories that help them make it happen. If you've ever had a big idea or want to tell yours in a more powerfully connected way, you're in the right place. I promise you'll get new ideas for how to tell a better story to your audiences too. So let's dive in. Hey everybody, welcome back. I'm Susan Lindner, your host of Innovation Storytellers, where we gather some of the greatest minds in innovation to talk about not just their innovation, but the way that they got their big idea across the finish line using stories to get there. And my hope is that you learn to tell a better story in the process. One of the areas that I love working in is in the energy and utilities sector. You might ask yourself, utilities? Aren't those the folks that just send me my electric bill every month? Aren't those the folks who just give me a heads up when the weather's turning bad and I need to bring in my outdoor furniture because the rain is coming and the lights might be going out? I want you to know, if you haven't thought about it before, that utilities are some of the greatest hotbeds of innovation taking place in your local community and frankly across the country and the world. As we know, energy is going to become, we were talking about on my last show, energy may become the new water. It's just that critical to power all the new advances that are taking place in AI, in quantum computing, and so many other fields where the need for energy is growing every single day. And you listeners are a part of that. So I'm so excited to have an expert in energy and specifically in utilities with me today. Robb Dussault is a seasoned engineer, a business developer, and a marketer with over 30 years of innovation experience in the electrical equipment and utilities industry. He's currently working with Duke Energy, among the largest and most innovative utilities in the country, as manager of Grid Edge Innovations. He's based in Raleigh, North Carolina, and he is going to open up a world for you of innovation that you probably didn't know existed. So, Robb, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks for having me, Susan.
So, today's conversation is electrical utilities and innovation. For some people, that doesn't feel like a breakthrough. And yet, I know from my own experience on the ground, this is where so much amazing work is taking place. So, how did you get into this space, Robb?
Yeah, it is a surprise for a lot of people to know that we innovate within utilities, but it is a real big part of our business.
Yeah.
To answer your question, yeah, when I was in engineering school many, many years ago, microprocessors were first starting to come into vogue, right, in the engineering community. And so, all of us students, we'd sign up for these microprocessing programming labs. And there was this old room inside of the same academic building that was the power lab, right? And in it were these big, gray, boring boxes. And I can remember one or two of my friends taking that curriculum and just feeling so sorry for them at the time, as they were working on these cool microprocessors and they're working on this buzzing equipment. Not only was it ugly, but it was scary, right? These huge gray boxes, and they were kind of buzzing, and we didn't know what was going on. But lo and behold, within 5 years of me getting out of school, I was working for a manufacturer of one of those big, gray box companies. It's Square D Company, which eventually became Schneider Electric. But I had found those things weren't so scary after all. In fact, there was a lot of exciting innovation going on, and it's really all around safety. And I know that, innovation, there's a lot of profit right behind innovation, but the things in this industry tend to focus around, the highest priority, which is really being safe around that equipment. And I would say probably one of the most dangerous things about those big gray boxes, many of those gray boxes, we call them switchgear.
Hmm.
And what that is that you might be familiar with, your circuit breaker box that's in your garage or your basement,
Sure.
where you have all
Mhm.
these little switches that have all this control the current through or manage the current through those, or are able to break the current through those through your home. When you think about big factories and hospitals and things like that, they have much bigger breakers, and we call that switchgear.
Hmm.
And a lot of times the switchgear needs to be maintained. And it's very dangerous to maintain these things because they're typically always powered up. And especially removing one of those breakers, if what an arc flash occurs, and it can literally throw you across the room. And if any of your viewers are on YouTube, they might, after the podcast, they might go search for arc flash incidents, and they'll find lots of videos where technicians are pulling these breakers out of these boxes and being hurt in the process.
Oh
And,
gosh.
and
Sounds
so,
scary.
yeah, it is scary. Yeah. So one of the things that Square D and others did was they automated that, right? They made a special robot and came up with other solutions, innovative solutions around the removal of those breakers so that somebody could essentially put those breakers in and out while they're around the corner and out of harm's way. So that
Mm.
was kind of the first, experience that I had, at least, to say, hey, something that looks like a really boring technology really has a lot, there's a lot that can be done to improve it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow. And so you get to see firsthand. And that is another place that utilities innovate that most people don't think of is on the safety front.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Because I remember we were fortunate enough to have Amarin, another utility company and a client of ours on the podcast. And we had fantastic conversations about the first mobile vehicle solutions, right? Or electric vehicle solutions were our bulldozers and those kind of like technologies that help linemen lay line where they otherwise wouldn't be able to do so because it's just
Mhm.
too treacherous and dangerous for humans to go, or they can dig out the line and then have skilled technicians come in and do the heavy lifting.
Sure. Yeah, and another I would say source of value that innovation has within this equipment industry is also has to do with reduced maintenance costs.
Mm.
And going back to the switchgear, I would say, another popular trend is, the switchgear. Like I said, I talked about the removing and installing the breakers, but also there's more, I would say, routine annual maintenance that typically goes into this, right? And again, somebody has to go out into the site and do things like tighten the lugs inside the cabinets and oil certain things and test certain things. And when this maintenance is done, you got to power it all off, of course, to keep the technicians safe. And that's very disruptive, right? When you talk about a hospital or factory or something like that. And so what my employer did, as well as some of our competitors, is we would install sensors into the switchgear. And so we could remotely monitor hot points within the gear and do sniffing of certain gases within the gear that allows us to only serve that or only service that equipment when it's necessary. They call that condition-based maintenance. And you could think of that, same technology could exist in cars today, right? That instead of you hearing that clunk clunk that's under the hood, that, your garage would be informed that there's something going wrong and they could conveniently call you and ask you to come in and have something serviced. So that same technology can apply across even to consumer products.
Yeah. Rob, so much of your background too is, from engineering, but also on the agile side. Can you
Mhm.
talk a little bit about, just thinking about running innovation teams and how important that idea development along with agile development to actually get pilots in motion really
Yeah.
matters inside of an organization? I mean, you're serving 8 million customers, right?
Yeah.
Um, Talk to us a little bit about the processes of how you build this innovation machine inside Duke.
Yeah, agile is certainly a big part of that, keeping things open, keeping the ideas flowing throughout the life cycle of the development process is really important.
Mm.
But another key attribute of Agile that plays in well is always testing what we have with the customer. And I think back on, probably about 10 years ago or so, we took a hard look within our customer programs area. There was a very popular program at the time called Refrigerator Recycle. And what happens there is that, you've got a 20-year-old refrigerator that's in your kitchen, time for a new one. Bring a new one in. What happens to that old one? Well, it ends up in the garage, with a case of beer in it or whatever the case might be. Well, that's a very inefficient refrigerator, and it is sitting in a hot garage, right? It is running all the time, and it is not very efficient. And so there was a program released back then where we would recycle that. What we would do is we just pay the customer an incentive, pay the customer essentially a fee, and then we would haul off that refrigerator, and we'd be able to take that inefficient piece of equipment then off of the grid. We had worked on an idea that was similar to that, but with inefficient mobile homes.
Mhm.
There are certain states that have a huge hundreds of thousands of mobile homes that were manufactured in the 1970s and that era. And especially as they get older, a lot of these mobile homes consume a lot more energy than a modern home. And we took a hard look at, hey, what would it be like if we paid the customer again an incentive so that they can then use that money as a down payment on a new mobile home or some other type of housing, and then take that inefficient unit off the grid. And so it seemed like a good idea. It seemed like it would have been cost viable. But again, per our process, we turned to the customers, right? And that was a whole part of that agile process is we say, what would this look like if we had this? And we did, some extensive customer conversations, facilitated conversations, also with sociologists, right, to better understand what would the behavior be. And it turns out it wasn't such a good idea. We found out that those customers would not necessarily put that whole deposit toward new housing, but instead split that up among the other responsibilities they had, like healthcare, transportation, food security. And so we were removing essentially this program was making housing less stable. And so that
Mm.
was an important lesson. And
Wow.
I was grateful for it because it helped me understand that you always have to check with the customer to make sure that they're developing something that they'll value.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow. Such
Yeah.
a critical part, right? And frankly, there are a lot of innovators who don't have direct customer contact. And
Right.
so
Yeah.
really rethinking whether or
Yeah.
not our pilots are sustainable, viable, scalable, right? Really depends on whether or not we're having direct dialogue with the customer.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
important.
Yeah. Sure is. Yeah.
And that viewpoint on agile, just in general,
Mhm.
for companies that aren't necessarily software and technology oriented,
Yeah.
still need those agile processes in place.
Oh, yeah, for sure. And, driver safety is a big driver for us.
Mhm.
And sometimes it crops up, opportunities crop up in things that you're not necessarily focused on. People think of, utilities as, okay, they generate and distribute electricity to me. But I've never heard of such an industry that has such a wide variety of professional disciplines within the industry. And that's what makes it so fun.
Right.
We have, of course, regulatory and legal, which is its own kind of fun, but we have
Quote
we
unquote fun. Yeah. I
yeah.
haven't heard it described that way yet, Rob. Thank you.
But a lot of people don't know that we have things like helicopter pilots, right, that can fly over transmission lines and do inspections. We have meteorologists, right, who are always watching out for the weather. It has influence, of course, on our infrastructure and our solar capacity. And also vegetation management, if you can believe it.
Um,
Things like in solar fields, right? You can't have those, grass growing above the solar panels. If you think about the miles and miles of transmission lines that we have, and underneath those transmission lines are wide swaths of property, right? And all that vegetation has to be managed so that the trees don't grow up into the lines. But probably one of the bigger challenges there is the distribution lines that run, down the side of the road, right? So many people have seen, awkward trees that, the utility crews have come by and trim the trees around those transmission lines, right? And so think of what that job must be like, right? So you're a technician, you're in a bucket truck, and you've got a chainsaw, and you're so many feet away from the power line. And by the way, the bucket truck is sitting on a busy road, and how precarious that must be. Another type of person that's working at that site is what we call a flagger. And so that flagger is guiding the traffic around that work site, right? And typically you have one on either side, and you've reduced a 2-lane road to a 1-lane road, and you're alternating the direction. Well, that flagger is also, there's some risk to that flagger too, because you could be driving down a rural road that you're very used to, and all of a sudden there's a new stop sign there that's being held by somebody, right? So I would say there's a trend in the industry to use robot flaggers. And so that person can stay safely away, right, from the road. That one person can see both sides of the traffic, and then let up this side, wait until the traffic is clear, then let up that side. And so you have many elements there where you're really making, that flagger as well as the work crew safer.
Yeah. I mean, can you get it to call out sometimes too and say, hey, we got a rogue one coming through here?
Yeah.
Yeah, but that is true. I mean, I do get nervous about hitting those guys in the road trying to flag you by. And if you're not paying attention, I mean, things can get ugly.
Yeah, they sure can. Yeah.
So, I mean, this is the thing that customers don't know is that like you're
Mhm.
actively deploying robots and drones and,
Yeah.
helicopter pilots and things like
Yeah.
people
Yeah.
really don't
Yeah.
realize it's taking place right in their own backyard.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know,
Yeah. The robots is really changing a lot in this industry. Robots are great when something is dirty, dull, or dangerous.
oh, the
Okay.
3Ds. Haven't heard
Yeah, the
that.
3Ds. You haven't heard that before. Yeah.
Dirty, dull, and
Yeah.
dangerous.
Yeah.
That's what we could
Yeah.
expect to
Yeah.
automate from Duke. Got it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mhm.
And it's important, when you're in the innovation space in such a big company, is to socialize technology. Of course, the best solutions start with customer problems, right?
Okay.
That's what we keep in mind in the innovation space. However, you have creative technology, really great technologies out there, and it's important that everybody knows about those technologies so that the right person who knows the customer problem can make the match.
Mm,
Again, going back to YouTube videos, I think we've all seen at one point those robot dogs that Boston Dynamics has.
sure.
We see many videos of those and them dressed up as, Cocker Spaniels and stuff like that. But we actually got one of those and put it in our innovation lab, which is something that many employees visit if they're bringing customers by or they're testing something in the lab. And I would say for, a while, this robot dog was just kind of used as a demonstration piece of equipment, to have it walking around the lab. And those things are really creepy if you get up close to them. But anyway, one application came from that socialization that wasn't thought of before, and that is utilities are starting to employ what they call utility scale batteries, which are huge batteries the size of a truck. And they're typically not all by themselves, but they're in, banks of 2 or 3 or 4 batteries. And when this technology, which is lithium ion, when it starts to fail, one of the failure modes is that it gives off hydrogen gas, and which is not detectable by humans. And so how do you make sure that these, there's no hydrogen gas leaking from them? And what they discovered is that they could mount a hydrogen sensor on these robot dogs, and that these robot dogs can continuously go back and forth or periodically go back and forth between these battery cells. And what the dog is doing is sniffing out any signs of hydrogen. And so this is a
Oh,
great example of, hey, we wouldn't be able to come up with that because we didn't know that that customer problem existed. And only by socializing that technology do you make that match.
and right now there's some MIT student listening to this going, God, we could capture that hydrogen. We could find a way to turn that into some secondary fuel source, and we can make that into the next cool thing that we haven't thought of yet.
Yeah, right.
I still
Yeah.
remember being at it was the Entrepreneurs Organization Global Student Entrepreneur Awards. And there were these kids from MIT, kids, they were college students, and they figured out how to conserve the kinetic energy that comes from the bump that every car goes over, right?
Uh-huh.
That
Yeah.
energy, and converting that back into the fuel cell of the car
Yeah.
in order to, like, why can't every bump generate energy for the car, generate
Uh,
electricity for the car? And it was like, God, why hadn't anyone ever thought of that before? Like,
right.
every bump equals X number of feet that you can go. And it was fascinating. So I'm always
Yeah.
curious what the off gas, in this case, literally, what could it create a
Right.
secondary product? And just
Yeah.
to your innovation whiteboard, Rob, that's a freebie right here.
Oh, okay. Thank you very much. I'll add that to the list.
Because you don't have anything else going on.
Yeah. But batteries, I mean, speaking of batteries, I mean,
Yeah.
that is the next frontier. And it's so exciting, and especially when it comes to customer programs. And the reason why it's so exciting is that a lot of customers are wanting to get batteries for their homes, typically as a complement to their solar, their rooftop solar. And, even as little as 5 years ago, it was not cost practical, right? And so if you think of somebody with, solar on their rooftop, they can consume that free energy, during the day, but at night or on rainy days, they don't have any source of energy, right? So they use energy from the grid. So a lot of customers think, well, if I get a battery, I can put it in my garage and I can start to consume my solar, even though the sun isn't out.
Hmm.
And so as these batteries decrease in price, more and more customers are getting this. We're discovering new ways that we, the utility, can tap into the energy that's in that battery. And so the great thing about those batteries is that, you can access the energy back and forth, several times a minute if you need to. Well, that does a lot in terms of how we're able to use those batteries to stabilize the grid, right? So there's all kinds of adjustments being made on the grid to exactly match supply with demand. And having those batteries out there can really help. So what utilities all over the country, all over the world are considering, and several of us have implemented such programs, is that if you have a battery, we will pay you for access to the energy in that battery. And that's through
Hmm.
what we call our demand response programs. And this is just a very, very exciting field. It's really giving us, access to a very important tool that we can use to really improve the grid stability, the reliability. We can really decrease pricing because instead of installing big pieces of equipment or buying our own big batteries, we're using those batteries that customers already have, and customers make money out of this box that's sitting out in their garage. And what's really cool about that is that people are driving around batteries in their EVs, right?
Hmm.
And eventually we'll get to a point where you come home from work, you plug in your EV, and that battery isn't just sitting there getting charged, but it's also interacting with the grid. In other words, we're using that car as a grid resource. So that's another exciting prospect of, the change that batteries are making in our industry.
And, just thinking about this, the idea of us shifting to a battery oriented energy culture. Um,
Yeah.
so many of the things that correct me if I'm wrong, but solar took so long to get to where it is today because
Uh,
we lacked the technology to really store and send
mhm.
energy that households were collecting from the
Yeah.
roofs. Not to mention it was costly, they're big, they're unsightly, etc. I have to imagine that that format is shrinking. I remember Elon Musk purchased a company that was going to have solar-based roof tiles.
Yeah.
And they were, shingles that we were going to have on our homes, that every shingle was a solar panel.
Yeah.
I don't know what happened to that technology.
I was wondering the same thing. I read
Hmm.
his biography earlier this year, and yeah, that was a big part of his plans. But yeah, I haven't heard much about that either.
Yeah, if I remember correctly, that was like his cousin's company or like,
Yeah, I
and
don't quite remember.
he wanted like a piece of that technology. And I think that piece was figuring out how to store. There was a lot
Uh,
of battery oriented, or at least energy collection related technology that was
yeah.
inherent in that company. I
Yeah.
don't think the shingles actually made it thus far.
Right. Yeah, for sure.
But what else can you foresee? Can you like hold up a little bit of a crystal ball for us, Rob? What else do we
Mm,
see? We think about cars being probably the biggest source, and maybe the
yeah.
solar panels, but what else should we be thinking about? And I'm not just
Yeah.
thinking about in our homes, but
Yeah.
from a municipal standpoint, from a community standpoint, right? At the
Yeah.
moment,
Yeah.
we're looking at Tesla putting up charging stations at your local mall
Yeah.
and facilities to get energy.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of clamoring for government to get involved to begin to set up
Hmm.
these charging stations.
Mm,
Rockefeller set up the pumping station networks right
yeah.
across the United States, which was all a real estate play. It was a profit play, right? It was a distribution play. There were so many different business models inherent in that. Uh,
Yeah.
how do you foresee that going? I know that's a highly loaded
Yeah.
question, but just at the community level, take us to where batteries and the grid is going from that perspective.
Capacity growth is growing at an unprecedented rate. It
Mhm.
is really amazing. In part, it's driven by electric vehicles, right? But there's all kinds of what we call electrification happening. Another great example of these neighborhoods, right, that we're seeing pop up in the southeast and in other parts of the country. Developers always trying to reduce costs, and one way they're finding to do that is that they can eliminate infrastructure costs by not running gas lines into the
Mhm.
neighborhoods. So now you have, a greater dependence. What you've essentially done there is you've taken what is normally a gas, appliance, your furnace or your stove, and you're turning it into an electric appliance. And so there's a lot of that going on. And another huge contributor to capacity are the data center growth, which we've all heard about. These data centers just consume a massive amount of energy, every one of them, requiring whole new levels of infrastructure and building more power plants, building more transmission lines. That's only a part of the equation because there's more pressure to make sure that our energy is clean, right? Reliable and clean and efficient, and of course, safe. And so, one way to make a really efficient plant is to not necessarily build a plant, but to have these customer programs where we're tapping into things like customer resources that are already there or their EVs that are sitting in the garage. Those are just ways that we're kind of mitigating the need to build more capacity.
Mhm.
But of course, that'll never offset the amount that the capacity is growing. But it's just going to be fascinating in the next few years to understand or to witness, right, how that. And of course, we have some plans, right, on how we going to meet that need. And it's just going to be a fascinating experience to watch that all play out.
So if you think about talking to other innovators who are listening to this conversation
Mm,
today, what should they be thinking about in terms of just even gauging demand, and thinking as AI comes along, as quantum comes along, what should other innovators be thinking about as they plan for their energy needs in light of these other transformations?
yeah. Boy, we're hyper focused, and it's really a testament to this whole industry, is that we're hyper focused on our customers, and and when and it gets even more the case when we think about customers and how they're interacting with their energy in new ways. I mean, who knew that we would be plugging in our cars, one day? And so customers are being more interactive with their energy, saving energy through things like programmable thermostats, grid-enabled water heaters, HVAC systems that are connected to the grid, backup generators. And it's going to be, and what I would encourage innovators to do is to look for the customer problem, right? What is the customer going to want to do next?
Mhm.
And that is really what plants the seed for a good, a worthwhile innovation project. Mm-hmm.
And I'm thinking, I had a guest on from Norway who was really fascinating. He was running data centers out of Norway, and he said, I want to invite all your listeners to set up your data centers in Norway because number one, it's really cold here. So you don't have to worry about heating, cooling things off like you would in the middle of North Carolina. Uh,
Yeah.
He's like, number two, we've got these fantastic fjords. Water just flows over your data center. Like it's just gravity. Like, I could just make this happen.
Yeah.
So you don't even have to worry about the two most important resources. We
For
can
sure.
generate all that right here. So, and it's like, not to mention we use wind, solar, and everything else,
Yeah.
from a sustainability standpoint. So
Right.
how much is this sustainability side of the equation, Rob, part of your thinking?
Yeah. Yeah. So sustainability is certainly a hot topic in it. And although we have our own sustainability goals, it really affects a lot in the public domain who is influencing that need to be clean, right?
Mhm.
And that kind of ebbs and flows when it comes to politics, but I mean the goal is still there, and that is to deliver clean, efficient, and affordable and safe energy. And
Mhm.
it's just a very it's a balance, right?
Yeah.
And I'm excited that customer programs is a part of that balance because every through our energy efficiency programs, again, that is infrastructure that we don't have to build, right? And so there's nothing cleaner than a kilowatt that you don't have to generate. And so yeah, that's
And what,
how it plays in.
the last question I have for you is what do you think, what's top of mind for you as an innovator? What are you thinking about going into 2026 and maybe where some of your focus is moving forward?
Yeah, there's just so much opportunity. Sometimes it's hard to prioritize, right? Uh,
Yep. For all of us.
yeah, yeah. And there's there are opportunities that we can make an immediate impact, and there are opportunities that take a lot longer, but they make a much bigger impact. And how do you manage that portfolio of innovation in a way that will, where you get the biggest bang for the resources that you have available to you?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, now it's time for me to put you on the hot seat and ask you the three questions I ask everyone who comes on the show. What is the greatest innovation of all time?
Well, this artificial intelligence is blowing me away.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's a
And
huge one.
I know we're very early into it, but it's just the prospects of what it can do. And I would hate to be somebody coming right out of high school right now and trying to pick a career
Mm,
that's not going to be obsolete because you could easily dedicate 3 or 4 years of your life into something that, oh, wait a minute, it's now automated. So that would take a lot of focus.
yeah, that's
Yeah.
why this anthropologist is very happy she studied what she did because I don't know how the robots are going to replicate that. But hit me up if you're looking to put together a pilot for AI anthropologists. I'm all in.
Okay.
I want to learn. If you had the opportunity to join any innovation team in history, which team would you have joined?
Oh, wouldn't it be great to have been a part of the Macintosh revolution?
Oof. Yep.
Oh, yeah.
Uh-huh.
I can remember reading that Steve Jobs biography.
Uh-huh.
And there was a third person, I forget what the person's name was, that was involved early on. And that person kind of sold out for a couple $100 at the very beginning. And I thought, oh man,
What a heartbreak.
it would have been great to take that job at that time and say, okay, I'll take it.
I'll step in. I'll be employee
Yeah.
number 4. No problem. Yeah. And lastly, what is the innovation that the world needs now?
I would love to see AI applied well in healthcare. My wife is in the healthcare profession, and so I get to hear about, things that they're working on in a hospital setting. And I just fantasize about all the things that AI could do to do things like keep hospital patients safer or listen for changes, right, in speech patterns and things like that as early detection of strokes, things like that. Security. But of course, they're kind of battling their own cost pressures and stuff. But you would think that if this AI were well applied in that industry, that costs would fall out the bottom because you have a lot more work being done behind the scenes with the same amount of people. So that's going to be a great thing to watch too.
Yes. I sincerely hope so, because we need those efficiencies, right, in order to catch up with the diseases that never sleep.
Yeah, for sure.
Robb Dussault, if people want to get in contact with you, what's the best way for them to do that?
Yeah, so what they could do is reach out to my LinkedIn.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Fantastic. Great. We
Yeah.
will put that in the show notes. And thank you so much for joining me today, Robb.
Yeah, thank you, Susan.
I truly hope you enjoyed today's conversation. If you did, be sure to like, follow, and subscribe so you never miss the next story that could inspire your own. And if you want to learn more about me or how I can help you and your team to become master storytellers to get your big idea to its finish line, head over to innovationstorytellers.com and schedule a call with me.